first thing to die in the Bridgeton food liner was not the light, nor the hope of the 50 souls trapped inside. It was the very concept of sacred. As Mrs. Carmody raised her sacrificial knife to the throat of a sobbing child, the mist outside did not just press against the glass. It began to giggle. And then, the blood on the floor did not flow toward the drains. It started to form into a pair of oversized, pom-pom-adorned shoes. The mist was a wall of opaque white death, a shroud over Maine that breathed with the rhythmic heaving of unseen lungs. Inside the supermarket, the air was thick with the smell of stale floor wax, souring milk, and the metallic tang of adrenaline. Mrs. Carmody stood atop a checkout counter like a gargoyle carved from hate and old lace. Her eyes, yellowed like ancient parchment, swept over the huddled masses. To her, this was not a tragedy, it was a debut. For decades, she had been the crazy cat lady of the village. Now, with monsters shucking the scales off men's backs outside, she was the only one with an answer. "It is the end of days," she shrieked, her voice cracking like a whip. "The Lord has sent the locusts. The Lord has sent the fog. And why? Because you lusted. Because you forgot the old laws." David Drayton, clutching his son Billy, watched in horror as the crowd began to nod. Fear is a chemical reaction, and Carmody was the catalyst. She was turning a group of rational New Englanders into a mob of Stone Age zealots. "We need a blood offering," Carmody cried, pointing a crooked finger at Billy. The boy will appease the great beast in the mist." But then the sound changed. The scratching of the tentacles against the roof stopped. The low-frequency hum of the interdimensional rift outside was drowned out by something impossible. A soft, rhythmic squeaking, like rubber against tile. Pop! A single red balloon drifted from the back of the store, near the meat department. It bobbed lazily against the ceiling, defying the draft from the air conditioners. It was too bright, too red. It looked like a drop of fresh, arterial blood against the gray, flickering fluorescent lights. Mrs. Carmody froze. "What is this mockery? Who brings toys into the house of judgment?" "It's not a toy, Mrs. C," a voice whispered. It did not come from any one person. It came from the freezer units, from the drains, from the cracks in the linoleum. It was a voice like wet silk being torn. "It's a gift for the birthday girl." From the shadows of the fresh meat section, he stepped out. He was 6'4", dressed in a silver-gray suit of archaic silk, cinched with orange pom-poms that looked like tufts of dried brain matter. His face was a mask of cracked white paint, and his hair stood out in two orange fans of electric madness. Pennywise the dancing clown did not walk. He undulated. He moved as if the space between atoms was a playground he alone understood. "Who are you?" Ollie Weeks, the store manager, stammered, raising his revolver. "I'm the one who stayed behind, Ollie," the clown chirped, his eyes, bright, predatory yellow, spinning in opposite directions. "I'm the flavor of the town. I'm the dairy special. And oh, you all look so tasty. You're all seasoned with such exquisite dread." He inhaled deeply, his nostrils flaring. Mrs. Carmody did not flinch. She saw a rival. She saw a demon. "Begone, foul spirit! I speak for the Almighty. This place is under His protection." Pennywise stopped. He tilted his head, a sickening crack echoing through the silent aisles. He looked at Carmody, and then he began to laugh. It was not a human laugh. It sounded like 1,000 seagulls fighting over a dead dog. "Your God is not in this mist, Sylvia," Pennywise whispered, his voice suddenly dropping into a guttural, ancient growl. "Your God is a turtle who choked on a galaxy eons ago. There is nothing out there but the void, and me, and I'm much, much hungrier than your God." The crowd was paralyzed. The monsters in the mist were alien, distant. This thing, this clown, was intimate. He was the face in the drain. He was the childhood nightmare you thought you'd outgrown. "Get out!" Carmody screamed, waving her knife. "The blood of the lamb protects us." "Does it?" Pennywise asked. He snapped his fingers. The floor beneath the produce section suddenly liquefied. The floorboards turned into a sea of black, oily water. One of Carmody's most fervent followers, a man named Myron, let out a strangled cry as he sank. But he did not sink into water. He sank into teeth. The floor tiles folded upward like the petals of a Venus flytrap, lined with thousands of needle-thin fangs. Myron's scream was cut short with a sound like a dry branch snapping. He was gone. The floor reset itself, gleaming in white, as if nothing had happened. Pennywise licked a drop of blood off his white painted lip. "Sour," he complained. "Too much bitterness, too much fanaticism. It spoils the marbling of the fear." He turned his gaze back to the crowd. "But the rest of you, oh, you're just right. You're terrified of the mist. You're terrified of the lady with the knife. And now, you're terrified of the funny man." "Shoot him," Carmody ordered. Ollie Weeks fired. The bullet hit Pennywise square in the forehead. The clown's head snapped back. A hole the size of a quarter appeared in the white grease paint. But there was no blood. Instead, a swarm of black, prehistoric flies buzzed out of the wound, filling the air with a droning sound that made people's ears bleed. The clown straightened his neck, the bullet hole sealing itself with a sound like wet clay being molded. "Ollie, Ollie, Ollie," Pennywise tisked. "Do not you know? I'm the monster that eats monsters. And you're just the appetizer." Suddenly, the lights in the store did not just flicker, they turned orange. A deep, pulsating amber that seemed to vibrate the very bones of everyone present. Outside, the things in the mist, the tentacled behemoths and the multi-legged flyers, suddenly went silent. They retreated. They felt something older than the rift, something that had been hibernating under Maine for millions of years, and it was now standing between the frozen food and the baked goods. Mrs. Carmody, sensing her power slipping, pointed her knife at Pennywise. "The Lord will smite thee. We shall offer the boy, and the mist will clear. Kill the clown. Kill the boy. Sacrifice." The mob, driven by a madness that rivaled the clown's, surged forward. But they were not moving toward Pennywise. They were moving toward David and Billy. The clown watched, his yellow eyes glowing with a sick delight. "Yes," Pennywise whispered, dancing a little jig on the spot. "Season yourselves. Make the fear spicy. Make it burn." David Drayton backed away, holding Billy tight. "Stay back. Do not listen to her." But the people of Bridgeton were no longer people. They were a single, hungry animal. Just as the first hand reached for Billy, the ceiling of the supermarket began to bleed. Not a trickle, but a deluge. Thick, hot, clotted blood poured from the sprinkler system, drenching the aisles. "The first plague," Carmody screamed in ecstasy. "The Lord is watching." "No, Sylvia," Pennywise chuckled, his form beginning to stretch, his limbs lengthening until he was 10 feet tall, his fingers turning into serrated razors. "That's not the Lord. That's just my spit. I'm salivating." The store's intercom system suddenly shrieked to life. A carousel tune, jaunty, repetitive, and horribly out of tune, began to play over the speakers. Underneath the music, 1,000 children's voices began to chant. "You'll float too. You'll float too. You'll float too." The shopping carts began to move on their own, forming a circle around the survivors, their metal wheels screaming against the floor. They were not just carts anymore, they were cages. And Pennywise stood in the center, his jaw unhinging, revealing a throat that did not end in a stomach, but in a swirling, hypnotic abyss of orange light. "Who's first?" the clown asked, his voice now a chorus of everyone who had ever died in the mist. "Who wants to see the deadlights?" Mrs. Carmody, realizing she was no longer the master of this ceremony, lunged at the clown. "I am the chosen. I am the voice." Pennywise caught her midair. He did not use his hands. He used a tongue that was 6 feet long and covered in black scales. He wrapped it around her waist and pulled her toward his face. "You taste like vinegar and old Bibles, Sylvia," he whispered. "Let's see how you taste when you're inside out." The screams that followed were not human. They were the sound of a reality being torn apart. And in the orange glow of the flickering lights, the people of Bridgeton realized that the mist was a mercy, because the mist only wanted to kill them. The clown wanted to keep them forever. "Eat," Pennywise commanded the shadows. "Eat until there's nothing left but the squeal." And the shadows obeyed. The store was no longer a building of brick and glass. It had become a digestive tract. The aisles of the food liner stretched into infinity, the perspective warping so that the exit sign seemed miles away, a tiny, mocking ember in the dark. The smell of blood was replaced by the cloying, suffocating scent of cotton candy and rotting lilies. Mrs. Carmody did not die quickly. Pennywise held her aloft, her feet dangling inches above the floor. Her face, once a mask of righteous fury, was now a map of pure, primal terror. The clown's face began to peel back, not like skin, but like a flower blooming in a time-lapse video. Underneath the white grease paint was something shifting. Black scales, rows of serrated teeth that pulsed like a heartbeat, and deep within his throat, the deadlights began to hum. "Look into them, Sylvia," Pennywise crooned, his voice vibrating in the marrow of her bones. "Look into the lights. They're much brighter than your heaven." She screamed, a high, thin sound that broke as her eyes met that swirling, orange void. In an instant, the light in her eyes went out, replaced by a dull, flickering amber reflection. Her body went limp, not dead, but vacated. Her soul was already adrift in the macroverse, screaming in a dark that never ended. Pennywise tossed her aside like a crumpled candy wrapper. She hit the floor and began to float, her body bobbing 3 feet off the ground, rotating slowly in the stagnant air. "Mommy?" a voice called out. It came from the pharmacy section. It was the voice of a child who had been taken by the mist on the first day. A woman in the crowd, Sarah, let out a sob and ran toward the sound. "Sarah, no!" David Drayton yelled, but it was too late. As Sarah reached the pharmacy counter, the shadows did not just move. They stood up. They took the shape of a giant, upright leper, its flesh sloughing off in wet gray sheets. It did not grab Sarah. It simply opened its arms and folded her into its rotting chest. There was a sound like wet laundry being wrung out, a single, muffled gasp, and then Sarah's shoes hit the floor. Empty. She had not been pulled away. She had been erased. "The feast is served!" Pennywise shrieked, spinning in a manic circle. He clapped his hands, and the shelves of the supermarket began to scream. The boxes of cereal, the cans of soup, the loaves of bread, they all sprouted tiny, human-like mouths. They began to chatter, a discordant symphony of every secret, every shame, and every fear the survivors had ever felt. "Ollie," a box of crackers hissed. "You remember the girl you did not save? You remember the fire?" "Dan," a row of laundry detergent gurgled. "You know your wife never loved you. She was glad the mist came." The psychological dam broke. The survivors, already pushed to the edge by Carmody's fanaticism, collapsed into a frantic, weeping mess. This was Pennywise's true power. He did not just eat meat, he ate the self. He prepared his meal by tenderizing their minds, breaking down the barriers between reality and nightmare until they were nothing but raw, exposed nerves. "Run!" David Drayton screamed, grabbing Billy and backing toward the loading docks. "Do not look at the lights. Do not listen to the voices." But the exit was gone. In its place stood a giant red and yellow jack-in-the-box, the size of a semi-truck. Its handle was turning itself, a slow, grinding metallic sound that harmonized with the carousel music. Pop goes the weasel. The lid flew open, and instead of a puppet, a gout of black, freezing fog erupted, filled with the severed heads of the dairy's lost children. They did not bite, they laughed. They swarmed around the remaining survivors, their cold, translucent lips whispering the same thing over and over. "It's so much fun down here. You'll float. You'll float. You'll float." Pennywise moved through the chaos like a conductor. He stopped in front of a man named Ambrose, who was clutching a shotgun with trembling hands. The clown did not attack. He transformed. He became Ambrose's father, the man who had beaten him every day for 12 years. "You always were a coward, son," the apparition said, its voice a perfect mimicry of a dead man. "Even now, with a gun in your hand, you're just a shivering little boy. Why do not you make it easy? Why do not you join me in the basement?" Ambrose looked into the eyes of his father and saw the deadlights dancing there. He did not fire. He simply put the barrel of the shotgun in his mouth. "No!" David cried, but the boom echoed through the store, a punctuation mark in the clown's masterpiece. Ambrose fell, but his body did not touch the ground. Like Carmody, he began to drift upward, his blood forming a halo of red droplets that hung in the air like Christmas lights. Pennywise turned his attention to David and Billy. He began to shrink, his terrifying height collapsing until he was just a normal-sized clown again. He looked almost cute if you ignored the row of needle teeth and the smell of ancient graves. "David," Pennywise pouted, his bottom lip trembling. "Why are you being so mean? I just want to play. Billy wants to play, do not you? Billy?" Billy, trapped in a catatonic state of terror, looked at the clown. His eyes began to glaze over. The orange glow was reflecting in his pupils. "Billy, look at me!" David shook his son, his voice cracking. "It's not real. None of it is real." "Oh, it's real enough for the taste buds, David." Pennywise laughed, his jaw snapping shut with a sound like a bear trap. "The mist was just the cage. I'm the butcher. And you're the prize-winning hog." The clown lunged, not with his hands, but with the entire room. The ceiling fans detached and flew like spinning blades. The floor tiles rose up like waves in a storm. The very air became thick and sweet, like inhaling liquid sugar. David stumbled back, tripping over a shopping cart. As he fell, he saw Ollie Week standing over him. But Ollie's eyes were gone. In their place were two burning, orange embers. "It's okay, David," Ollie said, his voice echoing as if from the bottom of a well. "The lights are so beautiful. They tell you everything. They tell you why the mist is here. They tell you why the world has to end." Ollie reached out a hand, but his fingers began to melt, turning into long, gray tentacles. These were not the tentacles from the mist. These were something worse. They were made of frozen screams and forgotten memories. Pennywise stood over them all, his arms spread wide, his shadow stretching across the entire store until it covered every wall, every floor, every soul. "The mist is a curtain," the clown whispered, his voice filling the universe. "But I am the play, and the final act is always the same." The lights in the store did not just flicker then. They died. Complete, absolute darkness swallowed the food liner. And in that darkness, the screaming began in earnest. Not the screaming of people being killed, but the screaming of people who realized they were never going to die. In the absolute darkness of the Bridgeton food liner, the silence was more terrifying than the screams. It was a heavy, suffocating silence, the kind that exists at the bottom of the ocean or inside a coffin. Then, the lights came back, but they were not the humming fluorescence of the grocery store. They were the deadlights. The ceiling had vanished. In its place was a swirling, cosmic vortex of orange fire, a gateway to a dimension of pure, unadulterated madness. Below it, the survivors were not standing. They were suspended in a thick, translucent webbing that draped from the top of the shelving units, like the work of a prehistoric spider. David Drayton opened his eyes and tried to scream, but his mouth was filled with a sweet, sticky substance that tasted of copper and cotton candy. He was hanging 6 feet above the floor, cocooned in silk. To his left, he saw Billy. His son's eyes were wide, staring into the orange vortex above. His pupils dilated until they were nothing but black holes, reflecting the flickering fire of the abyss. "He cannot hear you, David," Pennywise whispered. The clown was no longer a clown. He was a nightmare of geometry, a towering, chitinous horror that combined the features of a spider, a reptile, and something that had never evolved on Earth. His legs were long, needle-thin spears of black bone that clicked rhythmically against the linoleum. His face was a shifting mosaic of everyone David had ever known and everyone he had ever feared. "The mist, the things outside," David wheezed, struggling against the webbing. "What are they?" Pennywise crawled up the side of a freezer unit, his movements jerky and alien. He leaned his massive, bulbous head close to David's. "The mist is a tear in the fabric, David. A little leak from the outside. The things out there? They're just animals. They're hungry, yes, but they're simple. They eat the meat and leave the soul. They have no imagination, no style." The monster's mandibles clacked together. A drop of black ichor fell onto David's cheek, burning like acid. "But Pennywise hissed, his voice echoing with the power of 1,000 dying stars. "I am a gourmand. I do not just want your blood, David. I want your forever. I want the moment you realized you could not save your son. I want to taste the exact second your heart breaks. That's the nectar. That's the spice." Across the store, the cocoons began to twitch. The survivors were waking up to their final reality. Mrs. Carmody's body, still bobbing in the air, began to drift toward the center of the vortex. As she touched the orange light, she did not burn. She shattered, not into pieces of bone and flesh, but into shards of memory. David watched as a spectral image of Carmody's childhood, a moment of shame, a hidden sin, was pulled out of her and swallowed by the light. She was being unmade, layer by layer, until there was nothing left but a hollow shell of screaming static. "You see?" Pennywise chirped, his voice shifting back into the high-pitched tone of a circus performer. "No one dies in Derry, and no one dies in the mist. We just go on, and on, and on." Pennywise turned his attention to Billy. The boy began to float upward, drawn by the gravity of the deadlights. "No!" David's rage overcame his terror. He thrashed against the webbing, his fingers finding a jagged piece of metal on the shelf he was pinned to, a broken bracket from a display of canned corn. He sliced through the silk, the sticky strands snapping with the sound of breaking violin strings. He fell to the floor, landing hard. The store was a charnel house. The floor was carpeted in a layer of dead flies and shed skin. David scrambled to his feet, grabbing a fallen fire axe from a nearby pillar. Pennywise stopped. He looked down at David, his yellow eyes narrowing. "Oh, David, you want to play the hero? In this story, the hero is the first thing I eat." The monster lunged. He was a blur of black limbs and silver silk. David swung the axe, buried it deep into one of the chitinous legs. A spray of orange sparks, Not blood, but pure energy exploded from the wound. Pennywise shrieked, a sound that cracked the remaining windows of the storefront. "You little worm!" the monster roared. The store began to dissolve. The walls melted into a landscape of gray rock and black sewers. The shelves became piles of discarded toys, thousands of them, rusted tricycles, headless dolls, and blood-stained balloons. This was the Macroverse, the true home of the Eater of Worlds. David stood his ground, the axe trembling in his hands. He looked up. Billy was inches away from the vortex. "Billy, remember the house! Remember the lake!" David screamed, his voice tearing his throat. "Do not look at the light. Look at me." For a heartbeat, the glaze in Billy's eyes flickered. The orange reflection wavered. Pennywise loomed over David, his shadow covering the world. He opened his mouth, and David saw the truth. There was no clown, no spider, no monster. There was only an infinite, hungry void that had been waiting for him since the dawn of time. "Your son is mine, David. Your world is mine." The mist was just the dinner bell. But David did not look away. He did not blink. He reached into the one place Pennywise could not go, the core of a father's absolute, unselfish love. It was a frequency the monster could not hear, a flavor he could not digest. "You're not a god," David whispered, his voice calm and cold. "You're just a parasite, and you're starving." David did not swing the axe at the monster. He swung it at the fire extinguisher strapped to the pillar next to him. The tank exploded, releasing a cloud of white, freezing foam. In the chaos, David grabbed a flare gun from the floor, left behind by one of the soldiers, and fired it directly into the center of the deadlights. The flare did not go through. It ignited the psychic atmosphere of the vortex. The orange fire turned a violent, screaming blue. The reaction was instantaneous. The deadlights recoiled. The gravity reversed. The cocoons began to fall from the ceiling like overripe fruit. Billy dropped, and David caught him in midair, shielding him with his body. Pennywise let out a scream that shook the foundations of the universe. His form began to shrivel, his black bone limbs snapping and curling like burning hair. "This is not the end," he wailed, his many faces blurring into a single mask of agony. "I am eternal. I am the eater of—" With a final, thunderous pop, the vortex collapsed. The gray rocks, the sewers, and the toys vanished. David and Billy hit the cold, hard linoleum of the food liner. The lights flickered once, twice, and then settled into a steady, mundane hum. The mist was still outside. The tentacles were still scratching at the glass. But the supermarket was just a supermarket again. David looked around. The other survivors were slumped on the floor, breathing but unconscious. Mrs. Carmody was gone, not dead, but simply absent, as if she had never existed. Only her knife remained, stuck in the floorboards. Billy blinked, his eyes clear. "Dad?" David pulled him close, sobbing into the boy's hair. "I've got you. I've got you." They were still trapped. The monsters in the mist were still waiting. But as David looked toward the back of the store, he saw a single, deflated red balloon lying in a puddle of spilled milk. It was not scary anymore. It was just a piece of trash. The interdimensional predator had been driven back into the dark, defeated not by guns or prayers, but by the one thing it could not understand: the willingness of a human being to look into the abyss and say, "No." David picked up the axe and stood in front of his son, facing the glass doors. The mist was shifting, parting for a moment to reveal a colossal shape moving in the distance. "We're going to the car," David said, his voice hard as iron. "And we're not stopping for anything." Outside, the mist waited. But inside David Drayton, the deadlights had finally gone out.